Good evening and welcome to the Burbank Police Department, City of Burbank's regular meeting of the Burbank Police Commission for Wednesday, March 15th, 2023. At this time, we will go ahead and start with the call to order and roll call.
Commissioner Chapman? Present. Chair Coombs?
Present.
Commissioner Elman is absent. Commissioner Feruzin?
Here.
Commissioner Hakobian?
Here.
Commissioner Liu is absent. And Commissioner McKenna?
Here. All right, so we're going to go ahead and have Mr. Chapman, Mike is going to go ahead and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance and the flag salute this evening.
Everybody please stand for the card. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mike. So the public comment period will be coming up in a few minutes. To speak during the public comment period, members of the public may speak for 3 minutes in person in the council chamber, or they may call 818-238-3335. Members of the public who attend the meeting in chamber will speak first, followed by those phoning in their comments. And I know we have one comment card already, and if there are other comments to be made, please approach Ms. Nakamura to go ahead and complete another card. So at this time, we'll go ahead and start with, we're moving on to item C, commission announcements and reporting out by commissioners and ad hoc subcommittees. Does anybody have anything to report out on?
Just continued participation in the Community Academy. I was pleased to have Commissioner Habogian and yourself there on Saturday, last Saturday for the range day.
I appreciate that too. It was the one class that I missed last summer, so I'm glad I got a chance to go to that. So, and really want to encourage folks, if you're thinking about doing the Community Academy, please do so. Any other announcements? Layla?
Thank you. I just wanted to say a quick word that, there were some recent student safety issues at some of the BUSD schools that I know a lot of families were concerned about. And I realize that involves both the school district and, Burbank Police Department and the city and, working together. But just to note that I've heard from some community members on this issue. I don't know if any folks are going to comment on tonight or not, but just, that some parents are concerned about what the response will be to those issues, which, we're all concerned about and would not want to see repeated. And just making sure that it's a holistic response, and that we just need to listen to and address the concerns of all parents, and find a solution that works for everyone and results in everyone feeling safer and more comfortable, especially for our Black and brown students. That's the parents that I heard from were families of color. And so I just wanted to raise that and to let folks know that there is a Burbank Unified meeting, specifically a special meeting on school safety on Friday at 6 p.m. So that may be, the more appropriate venue for that, but as it does concern also, Burbank Police Department that, responds at our schools, I wanted to just raise that here.
Great, thank you, Layla. Any other announcements, brief announcements? Okay, at this time then, we're going to go ahead and move into item D, which is oral communications for 3 minutes, and I do have a card here. So we'll go ahead and start with the gentleman in the room. Mr. Lewis?
Thank you. Good evening, Chair, council members. I'm here tonight as a parent, but not for on-campus issues, actually off-campus. I can't stay for the whole meeting, unfortunately. I got to go to open house at Huerta Middle School, which is what I'm here about. I'm lucky enough to be able to have walked my children to school for the last few years. My oldest attended elementary near our home, same as my youngest, and now I'm really happy to be able to walk my sixth grader to school. But I'm here because there is a bit of a gap in, I think, some of the follow-through in traffic. And I am a vice chair of the Transportation Commission, but I am here tonight as a private citizen. And one of the reasons why I decided to send you all an email on Thursday with some video evidence that I took is I wanted to follow up in that Lieutenant Frommer came to Transportation and talked about kind of like the circle of how we do transportation and traffic in the city. We do design, we do implementation, and then we do enforcement of folks who are not following. And the intersection of Verdugo and Virginia has an actual upgraded pedestrian walkway, so it's clear to me as a citizen that there had been complaints and issues at this intersection before. Traffic did upgrade it to a lighted sign. And my concern is, we've been walking to school since August. It is now March. And my wife had called at one point to ask for a traffic study to see if any, additional traffic safety could be done on the planning side or the engineering side. And so now I'm here, not only in the interest of, seeing people be reminded gently of their obligations, but also that we can continue a dialogue between the different parts of the city, and that we had, and Commissioner McKenna had informed me in years past, a Safe Streets to School program where we had participated, parents and other interested like-minded citizens and police had gone and kind of set transportation patterns for the first 2 weeks of school. And I think that there is a direct correlation with a discontinuation of this program and a distinct lack of care and duty to people, to pedestrians around schools, in that people have changed their behaviors after the pandemic. They've done a lot more driving, a lot more aggressive driving, and we've forgotten that other people, as well as children, like to transport to school. Now, I'd like to let my sixth grader walk by himself to school, but my wife won't let me do that while we're continuing to get menaced every day. And you can see in the video people completely blatantly ignoring pedestrian safety, the rules of the road, as well as just basic, call it courtesy to other people. So I hope that we can continue this dialogue as well as continue to work with citizens in the neighborhood and people, because I'd like to see a majority of students walking to school and transporting via bikes or skateboards or whatever non-roadways, and not see a 3/4 of a mile long parking lot on residential streets while people try to drop off their middle schoolers because they're afraid. And I don't blame them. I blame the system. So we need to help fix that. And I hope so. Thank you.
Mr. Lewis, thank you. And do we have any other public comment from the audience? All right, let's go ahead and open it up. Do we have any phone calls that are coming in?
We do not, sir.
All right, so with that, we're going to go ahead and continue to move on. Give me one moment to get back to my agenda. All right, let's see. We can open up for commission response to public comment at this time? Paul?
Yes, sir. I'd like to respond to Mr. Lewis. As always, thank you for your input. I would like to point out the commission that he spoke of, we were on the Transportation Commission together, but that Safe Routes to School was part of the Traffic Commission, which no longer exists. And I do know there's been discussion about who's going to pick that up. But I just don't want you to think that it was something I brought forward as a member of the Police Commission, because that would be premature at this point since we're talking about it. But as you very well know, your children attended my wife's school. This is something very sensitive to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Roman?
Thank you, Chair Coombs. Mr. Lewis, thank you so much for voicing your concerns. As a parent of a 12-year-old that goes to John Muir Middle School, I completely validate what you're saying. I mean, I have to park 3 blocks away, walk to the school to pick up my daughter because of the driving behavior of some of the parents. And it's dangerous, and hopefully this can be addressed, and I really appreciate the PD and what they're doing to look into it. But yeah, it's definitely an issue. I mean, we try to talk about reckless driving, but, that's from children, like young kids doing that. But to see parents doing that, that's just disheartening. But thank you.
Thank you, Romick. Leila?
Mr. Lewis, I just wanted to say thank you for taking your time to come down and share your concerns with us. I also have 2 children, small children in BUSD schools, and see dangerous driving behavior on a regular basis, unfortunately. But I also wanted to let you know that we do have a subcommittee that is working on some of these types of safety issues, at least as far from as we can on the police and enforcement side of things. So I will definitely follow up with you after this meeting.
Leila, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Mike, did you want to?
Yeah, very quick. Thank you very much, Mr. Lewis. Something you didn't mention, and maybe the department can maybe give a response here, is crosswalks, crosswalk guards. I'm not sure if they have them in your area or if they're available, and if that would make a difference, but I'm just a thought I want to bring up.
And I'd like to note as well, this is for the commission. I don't have it in front of me this very moment. Ms. Nakamura, you might have it as well. We have school and traffic safety on our annual calendar. Does anybody know which month we tentatively address that?
I think it was,
It's in July, okay.
and because we wanted to move it up because the administrators are not at school in July.
Right.
So we can't, you and I had spoken
Okay.
offline about moving it up so that we can talk to the administrators before they leave for the school year.
Right.
And so we can have something implemented before the new school year starts.
So if that's something you'd like to move up, we can actually do that when we set the agenda at the end of the meeting. We can discuss that and
awesome.
make a recommendation. Okay,
That'd be awesome.
perfect.
Thank
Thank you. So with that, we'll go ahead and move on to the approval of minutes. Oh,
I apologize, but I didn't receive Mr. Lewis's email.
I was trying to see if it was sent out. I
Yeah.
can't check it because it's.
All right, thank you. I just FYI,
Yeah.
I'll double check. Thank you.
I hadn't received it either, so.
Thank you.
So with that, let's go ahead and take a look at the minutes from February 15th, 2023. And we need a motion to approve those minutes. Paul, it looks like, Paul, you're motioning to approve the minutes?
Actually, I was waving to Mr. Lewis, but I'll motion to approve the minutes.
Okay. And we have a second from Mike. All in favor of approving the minutes? Aye. Okay. All in favor? Yep. Thank you. All right, now we get to move on to our items of business. So the first item of business this evening is the presentation, discussion, and action, if any, regarding AB 2147, which is the Freedom to Walk Act in conjunction with the city's Vision Zero efforts.
Good evening, Commissioner Coombs, Chairman Coombs, members of the commission. I'm Sergeant Fletcher Stone with the Burbank Police Department Traffic Bureau. I'll be presenting on AB 2147, the Freedom to Walk Act, and how it might impact a proposed Vision Zero in the city of Burbank. If we could start the PowerPoint. So AB 2147 was introduced by Assemblyman Phil Ting from the city of San Francisco. It was signed into law by Governor Newsom on September 30th, 2022, and went into effect January 1. It amended several statutes that involved the duties and responsibilities of pedestrians in the roadways, as well as it set restrictions upon when law enforcement can conduct enforcement actions against people that may violate those sections. As you can see, there are several sections that were affected by this legislative change. Some of it was just mere language. The meat of the change was a requirement by the statute that says that a law enforcement officer cannot conduct a stop for a pedestrian violation unless there is an immediate danger. So it removes the ability of the officer to see somebody, let's say, jaywalking. He can't stop that person and issue a citation or conduct an enforcement stop unless the officer can articulate some sort of danger to the pedestrian in the roadway. So what this does is it opens up more pedestrians to be in the roadway. So the specific language is that the subdivision is a peace officer as defined in Chapter 4.5 of the Penal Code shall not stop a pedestrian for a violation unless a reasonably careful person would realize there is an immediate danger of a collision with a moving vehicle or other device moving exclusively by human power, bicycle. This subdivision does not relieve the pedestrian of the duty of using due care for their safety, and this subdivision does not relieve the driver of a vehicle from the duty to exercising due care for the safety of any pedestrian within the roadway. So what AB 2147 does not do, it actually does not legalize jaywalking. It does not legalize walking against signs, whether it's a red light, solid red hand, countdown red hand. And it does not change the requirements for pedestrians in the roadway. The problem that we're running into is, as you can see in the presentation, we get headlines like jaywalking will no longer be a crime in California. So what happens is the public sees that and they believe it's a free-for-all and that they can cross whenever, wherever they want, which is going to put more pedestrians in the road where we're going to have conflicts with vehicles. So battling the misleading headlines that came out after the passage of this is actually one of the bigger problems that we're experiencing since January 1. So what AB 2147 does as it relates to enforcement, like I said, it requires that the officer articulate some sort of danger to the pedestrian. The problem is that it removes an objective standard, you shall not cross, to a subjective standard. You can cross if you don't see a hazard. As one of my learned colleagues said, it's not the car that you see that hits you, it's the one that you don't see that hits you. So the problem with this is we are now inviting pedestrians into our roadways, believing that jaywalking is legal and they're going to get hit by cars. So Burbank has experienced an increase in pedestrian collisions, and that's common throughout the United States right now. From 2019 to 2022, we had 4 fatalities involving vehicle versus pedestrian crashes in the city of Burbank. One was a DUI, and in 50% of those collisions, the pedestrian was actually found at fault. The pedestrian was jaywalking and got hit by a car that was operating lawfully within the roadway. And that was before AB 2147 went into effect. So that was when it was a strict, you shall not jaywalk. Again, now that AB 2147 is in effect, and the subsequent media that went along with it, it complicates the issue. Again, so this trend will continue. Many pedestrians, we've done enforcement contacts. I've personally stopped pedestrians, and they believe that they are completely lawful to cross the street whenever they want, wherever they want. They can cross against the solid red hand because there's a green light, and all of those things that were changed as a result of 2147. Currently, the Traffic Bureau is producing several social media presentations to try to educate the public and counter the narrative that jaywalking is no longer against the law in California. And again, that's going to be our biggest battle right now. So now I'm going to briefly go over Vision Zero, and then I'll wrap it up with how these two things intersect. Burbank has not formally adopted a Vision Zero program yet, so I'm going to talk in kind of broad strokes about what Vision Zero is, how it's effective in Europe versus the United States, some of the issues that are presented by how the United States operates versus Europe, and how enforcement is affected by that as well. So on January 17, 2023, the City Council directed city staff to investigate a Vision Zero policy. That is still being reviewed. Ideally, Vision Zero is to minimize or completely eliminate traffic-related fatalities and serious injury collisions. This is done through a combination of engineering changes as well as legislative changes. The idea being that you don't want to mix pedestrians and vehicles. And when you put them in the same area, you want to lower the speeds significantly so that if a mistake is made by a pedestrian, made by a driver, the injury is not so severe as to warrant that causes death or serious injury. So when you can't separate pedestrians and vehicles, you have to slow those vehicles down. So Vision Zero was developed in Sweden in the late 1990s. Both Sweden and Norway are probably the two most successful Vision Zero programs in the world. Norway last year had their first year of no vehicular fatalities in the entire country. There are a lot of geographic things that work in those countries' favor. Smaller cities, more dense, the population density is much smaller. The cities were designed for pedestrian and horse traffic, not vehicular traffic. California is a car culture. Our whole city planning is designed around efficient vehicular movement. That is not conducive to some of the things in Europe that makes Vision Zero successful. There have been some successes in the United States. One example is West Palm Beach, Florida. They've done a really good job in terms of their engineering programs, where they have a very quick turnaround. When they identify a problem from a collision or a complaint, they've been able to make capital improvements or capital changes within 60 days. They do this by having on-call construction companies that are able to immediately begin construction and make those engineering changes once it's been identified. So that is would be a challenge because we don't have that sort of mechanism here in the city of Burbank. And again, California is a car culture. We love our cars. Our whole design of our cities is for the commuter, especially in Southern California. It's designed around the vehicular commuter. It's not designed around a pedestrian. It's not designed around, and that's evidenced by the fact that most of their stores, our schools, are not within walking distance of our home. So you have to use a car to get to where you're going. So Los Angeles has tried Vision Zero. San Francisco has tried Vision Zero. Both of those cities have run into significant issues with trying to reach that goal, or at least have a reduction as part of their Vision Zero program. One of the things in Norway that they do is they allow the city governments to lower the speed limit for what they see fit. We can't do that in California. We are required to use the 85th percentile. There obviously was legislation that allowed us to keep it at a 5 mile an hour lower than the 85th percentile if it raises the speed limit from what it previously was. But that is, again, there's restrictions on when we can do that. It requires the roadway to be used by certain types of people. We can't just do it on every roadway. So there are legislative changes that challenge us here in California as well. The other thing about like Oslo, with Norway having 0 fatalities, is they've completely cut off vehicular traffic in their downtown area. 0 cars. So they never have those issues where you're putting pedestrians and people in the same space. In Los Angeles, there's actually been pretty significant public pushback concerning Vision Zero. When cities have tried to implement some of the ideas found in Vision Zero, or they've identified issues, it impacts people's ability to travel in an efficient manner, and they get upset because they are not willing to sacrifice their time or what they perceive to be, I'm going to allow myself 30 minutes to accomplish this task. If I can't do it in 30 minutes, then it's not worth doing. So they choose speed, they choose efficiency over pedestrian safety. And that's a societal issue that, again, we're not going to be able to solve. That's something that has to change over the long term. But in the city of Los Angeles, when they've tried to do these improvements, especially when it comes to bicycles, they've gotten significant public pushback when they try to make those engineering changes. Again, that's a challenge for us in the United States. So, building on that, if we suddenly decided to implement a 20 mile an hour speed limit across the city of Burbank, that would minimize the likelihood of a fatality if a vehicle hits a person. That's about 20 miles an hour is our comfort zone. Anything above that, we're going to start getting into some serious injury. So, if we were to do that, traffic would come to a standstill. And people would probably not be very happy with that. They want to choose their own personal time over the safety of others. When they do the cost benefit analysis of that, their time is more important than the potential of saving lives. And that's borne out by the fact that we have the traffic issues that we do on our roadways. So again, in terms of Vision Zero, speed matters. It's all about slowing people down when they're going to be between pedestrians and vehicles when they're going to be interacting. One of the other challenges that we see in the United States is the federal government has not really gotten on board with Vision Zero. National Highway Transportation Safety Administration just this last year has finally put something out, a white paper concerning the Safe Streets approach, which is part of Vision Zero. The United States was not one of the 140 countries that signed on the Stockholm Declaration, which was in 2020, where it was sponsored by the United Nations on reducing fatalities on roadways across the globe. The United States elected not to sign and be part of that. They gave their reasons. Obviously, with the change in administrations, that's changed slightly with the new white paper under the Biden administration, so that has gotten some traction. However, it has not been fully implemented. So how does traffic enforcement and Vision Zero work together? The biggest difference between Europe and the successes in Europe with Vision Zero and the issues that we would have in the United States, specifically California or Burbank, is the fact that the fines, the penalties are much more strict in Europe than they are in the United States. For example, in Sweden and Norway, you get 2 citations a year, 1-point citation. So you were speeding, you ran a red light. After 2 violations, you lose your license for 6 months. Period. No ifs and buts about it. Currently in the state of California, you can have 5 citations in a year before you lose your license. So you're allowed 4 points. You get an extra point because you can go to traffic school and get 1 dismissed. So they're going to be able to do 5 speeding tickets before they actually lose their license. So that is obviously something that the enforcement only works if the deterrent, if the fear of the penalty is more severe than they're wanting to do the action. So in those countries where we're seeing dramatic drops, there is absolute certainty that you will be cited, that you will lose your license, whereas in California, it's a different game. They do strict speed limits in Europe. In other words, if you are over the posted speed limit by 1 mile an hour, that is a violation. In California, when we're talking about prima facie speed limits, which is the majority of streets, speed limits on our streets, then it falls under Vehicle Code Section 22350, which is the basic speed law, which requires, it doesn't say you're just going over the posted speed limit. You're traveling at a speed that, based on the conditions present, you're in violation. So again, there's a little more wiggle room, whereas in Norway, if the speed limit's 30 kilometers an hour and you're going 31, you're getting a citation. So we have that on our freeways. 22349A says anything over 65, but all of us drive on the freeway. I don't think any of us drive 65. So again, that's a challenge. So again, without the deterrent factor, then enforcement is a challenge. We can write tickets all day long, but if people don't feel the pain, then it doesn't really matter. There are other legislative things that have occurred that will be somewhat in conflict with Vision Zero and trying to make our roadways safer. One of the ones that was just recently passed by Assemblywoman Friedman was the change in the citations for driving without a driver's license, 12500 of the Vehicle Code. It has now been changed effective, I believe, 2027, where 12500 is an automatic infraction for the first 2 violations and then becomes a wobbler misdemeanor infraction on the 3rd. So UC Berkeley did a study several years ago about the correlation between hit and run and fatal collisions and unlicensed drivers. And in that study, they found that the overwhelming majority of drivers that are involved in fatal or hit and run collisions are unlicensed. So by removing unlicensed drivers from the roadway, you're less likely to have those types of collisions. So by implementing that type of thing, again, that doesn't necessarily promote traffic safety, because now we have people who haven't been properly trained, who aren't licensed, who don't necessarily know the rules of the road out on the roadway. And again, the deterrent factor is missing when there is no consequence for the action. So as I said before, San Francisco is one of the cities that has really invested in Vision Zero in the state of California, and it's actually one of the cities that's probably best situated for a Vision Zero program. It's a very small geographic area. Population density is very high in a small area, so you can facilitate all of those things that we talked about that make it challenging in Los Angeles. Stores, usually walking distance within residences, schools. And so when we look at how enforcement ties into Vision Zero, San Francisco traffic enforcement had a drop in citations. In 2019, the City of San Francisco Police Department averaged 74 citations a day for traffic violations. In 2022, that average dropped to 10 citations per day. In 2022, the City of San Francisco had 37 traffic-related fatalities, the highest number since 2007. So there's a direct correlation between enforcement and reducing fatalities. It's not the end-all of solving this issue. However, it is a very necessary and important component of it. And again, just San Francisco has probably invested more money in Vision Zero than any other city in the state of California, and they are still having significant numbers of collisions. They've also instituted a no driving zone in the Market District. They've still had fatalities there because people disobey the signs and they drive in. They haven't put in hard barriers yet. So those are some of the challenges that are presented with pedestrians and Vision Zero. So in conclusion, on its face, AB 2147, obviously, it challenges the established goals of Vision Zero because we're still putting pedestrians in an area where there are vehicles. Vision Zero requires those two to be separate. And when they're not separate, we lower speed limits. AB 2147 did not do that. In fact, it probably increases the likelihood of those conflicts between pedestrians and vehicles. Obviously, it's only been in effect since January 1, so we still have to kind of see where it goes. But again, through the context we do have had, the mindset of many of the pedestrians out there is that it's a free-for-all, and they're going to cross where they're going to cross. So AB 2147 was designed to address a problem, no doubt about that. But pedestrian safety wasn't that problem. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions the commission might have.
Sergeant Stone, thank you. I think we're going to have a number of questions and comments with this, and we'll go ahead and just kind of work our way around. Romick, do you want to start?
Oh, sure. Thank you, Chair Combs. Thank you so much for that presentation. Vision Zero Sum, it's something I've really been diving into, and I know I agendized the Assembly bill to be discussed. In regards to like enforcement and what does the PD do in a situation where laws like this come down from Sacramento? What is the conversation? What does this PD do in preparation for educating the public on how to take proper precautions? And what do you guys do as far as enforcement goes?
So we have, we do get funding from the Office of Traffic Safety to conduct pedestrian enforcement operations. That is both for vehicles that fail to yield to pedestrians when necessary, and then also to conduct enforcement operations against pedestrians who are violating the sections and put themselves in a position to be hit. During those contacts, we try to educate the public. Again, we're in the process of putting out some social media to counter the narrative that jaywalking is legal in California after the passage. So that's our biggest challenge. And it comes down to talking to people when we do make stops. Not all stops result in a citation, but we do try to get out there. AB 2147 sometimes does limit us in our ability to make those contacts because if there's not a vehicle around, I can try to make a consensual contact, but they can just walk away. So my ability to kind of force that conversation or force that education is limited because of the restrictions placed by AB 2147.
Paul?
I was going to ask what the bill actually does, but I think you just explained it. If there's no car in sight, there's no violation, but if there's a car in sight, it falls on you.
Correct. So what it does is it doesn't say it for the enforcement side of it. It limits enforcement to those situations. It doesn't legalize jaywalking. So and this is where we're having the issue, is what it does is it says the person has to use reasonable care to determine whether or not a vehicle is close enough to present a hazard, and then they're not allowed to cross. But like I said before, we usually don't get hit by the cars that we see. And there are so many cars moving, and they're moving fast, that we are not necessarily always going to see that. So that presents the challenge because we're encouraging people to be out on the roadway because, well, I didn't see that car. Well, I'm sure you didn't, but it still hit you.
Is it the old adage, you can only expect what you inspect?
That's right.
In your case, that's enforcement. Thank you.
Other questions or comments that folks have? Mike, you want to go ahead?
Yeah. Two questions. One, you were just talking about seeing the actual situation happen. Do the body cams or the thank you, body cams or the cams in the patrol cars ever get used for that kind of situation where you can be monitoring traffic or something like that?
Well, the in-car video camera and the body camera require activation. So the officer would have to activate it or activate his emergency lights to start the recording. It has a 30-second pre-record, so it's always got it's a running thing. So if the camera is pointed in the right direction, the violation can be recorded, absolutely. In terms of the contact with the public, yes, those are always recorded. We're mandated by policy to always activate our cameras and do that. So it does record it, but but the body cam also records me doing the fatality investigation when I'm there. So it's sometimes, the camera isn't really going to be the deciding factor on what happens. It's trying to get the message out to the people before they get into the roadway.
Good. You mentioned something about the people who hit pedestrians, that a fair percentage of them do not have driver's license. And this kind of maybe leads into a little bit something where we're going to discuss later this evening. How do you tell if somebody does not have a driver's license that's driving?
You can't. You have to have some other reason to stop them, and then you find that out during the course of the vehicle stop. But it's important to note that it wasn't pedestrian collisions. It was a study by UC Berkeley that said the vast majority of fatal and hit-and-run collisions. That could be vehicle on vehicle, vehicle versus pedestrian, vehicle versus bike. So it's important to say that it's not unique to pedestrian collisions.
Good. Thank you.
And my understanding is that unfortunately with the fatalities and the collisions, it's after the fact that you find out that the person doesn't have the driver's license statistically, so.
It's almost 100%.
Yeah.
I driving down the road, I can't tell if somebody, I've never in my 22 years pulled somebody over saying, hey, I think they don't have a driver's license. That's not going to be a stop that's held up. But it's usually, there's some other violation, and then during the course of that investigation, we determine they don't have a license.
Leila, did you have a comment or question?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you for that presentation. I just had a question. Given, I think, as you alluded to, that this law was put in place to address a different issue, but has, an effect in this other way that maybe is not desirable, which unfortunately is true of most laws probably. It's very tangled. But I'm just wondering, in your experience, or open to any other community members or staff here, just interested to hear what are your thoughts on improving pedestrian safety given this law, or other things if we're allowed to discuss that, but maybe just in the relation to this law, that's fine. Just given, you mentioned all the challenges of we have a car-centered culture, we can't lower speed limits as we want, those kind of things, and, and then having more pedestrians in the road now with cars, and just wondering what your thoughts are.
So one of our primary collision factors for vehicle versus pedestrians is the vehicle fails to yield to a pedestrian in a crosswalk, either marked or unmarked. That is usually happening on a left turn or a right turn. They're going this way, they want to make a left turn, they don't see the pedestrian coming in the crosswalk, and we have a strike. Or they're coming up, they're going to make a right turn, nobody stops at a stop sign, nobody stops at a red light completely, where the wheels stop turning at the limit line. They slow roll, and they're usually looking to the left to see if traffic's oncoming because they're going to make that right turn. They don't look to their left to see the pedestrian that's walking here, and they get hit in the crosswalk. So one of the probably the easiest things to address that specific type of collision would be that when we have crosswalks or crossings, it's all pedestrian at once and then vehicular traffic. So you minimize that interaction between pedestrians and vehicles. That might not work in some of our residential areas, but some of our bigger streets where we see the higher speeds, because again, we're talking about, we're not going to eliminate the ability of accidents to happen because people make mistakes, but we want the speed at which that collision occurs to be significantly lower to prevent the fatality or serious injury. So we can use that type of engineering change at our major intersections where our speeds are higher.
So you're kind of describing, like, for example, like the all-way crossings that they have on Colorado and Pasadena.
Correct.
But you'd probably have to, again, this goes into transportation infrastructure, but you probably have to identify the appropriate places to do that. Obviously, it wouldn't happen in a residential setting.
Right, because they're usually residential intersections are not controlled by signal lights.
Right.
So there's no way to stop all the traffic at once.
Right. It also seems like there's a timing issue with that as well, because Burbank, we have roughly 100,000 people that live here, but we've got about 150,000 people that come in every day. So we're swelling from 100,000 to 250,000 a day, and I just can imagine slowing down traffic or creating more no vehicle areas could be problematic. I know when I see people slow down, when I see people sitting in traffic, it's not uncommon for people to get upset when we've got a change like this. And usually when somebody gets upset at that, what we're seeing is somebody dart out in traffic or do something that they're not supposed to be doing. The agitation goes up. a little bit too. So that seems like that's contributing
Well,
to this.
to that point, Chairman, the public speaker, we're talking about the school zones. The reason why a lot of these drivers, they don't have kids there.
Yeah.
They're upset because they're being impacted on their commute
Right.
by the traffic generated by the schools. So they are driving in a manner that is unsafe, and all that because, again, societally speaking, they believe that their time is more important than their safety. And that's the cost-benefit analysis. And they determined that the deterrent factor or the penalty, if they get caught, is not severe enough to not do
Right.
the violation. So that puts, again, pedestrians and stuff at risk in those situations.
So do you have another question that you wanted to ask? Go ahead. Go ahead.
To your point about the schools, and a lot of times those are on those residential streets, some of them, just wondering, is it within the wherewithal of the city to legislate, or within the department just, administratively to have a policy around, making some of those intersections, changing the rules, basically the traffic rules for those intersections at certain times of day, like at school pickup and drop-off times or things like that, that aren't built environment things, because that's not our purview here, but
This is straying off the
Okay.
agenda item in terms of school. It's not, if it's
Yes.
not a Vision Zero, maybe Lieutenant Stone can discuss whether it's a Vision Zero, but if it's a school safety issue that's not related to these other
I'll
items.
make it more
Great, thank you.
general, just in terms of this, given this new law, if there are places we know there's a lot of pedestrians, is that, that may be likely to jaywalk or things like that? Are there ways to put protective for the pedestrians rules in place during certain times of day, so it's not disrupting all the time? Is that
I don't
better?
know about rules. We can definitely control improvements, infrastructure engineering, but most of the rules are mandated by the state of California through the vehicle code. So it would take a legislative change from Sacramento to do that, no matter whether it's a school zone or anywhere else.
Yeah, the proper word is preemption.
Yeah.
So if it's addressed by the vehicle code and they don't give us separate authority like they do with parking standards, then we're preempted from changing the rules that otherwise apply through the vehicle code.
Thank you. Yeah. So one of the things that came up, we talked about this before. We were talking about the direct correlation between enforcement and reducing fatalities. My understanding, I think, last time I checked, there were still one or two motor officer vacancies, correct?
Correct. We're currently budgeted for 12 motor officers. We have 10 assigned, 9 deployable.
Okay. And is there any updates or status on filling those positions?
I believe that's probably not in my wheelhouse, so
Okay.
I would defer to
Okay.
the chief on that one.
Because it's just an issue about, if we're talking about, if our, what we're looking at is about enforcement to try to, put a message out there and increase safety, having as many officers out there as possible would be important for traffic. But Chief?
Yeah, in time, it's just staffing, how we
Okay.
prioritize. But you keep talking about enforcement, there's a huge educational component to this. So our social media person is here, Sergeant Feckety, and we do a very robust campaign on pedestrian and driver safety in addition to what we do in the schools.
Great.
So we outreach to 1,500 students, or was it more than that?
It was
Yeah.
more than that.
Yeah, so that's annually now.
Yeah.
So we're starting for drivers, and there's also the pedestrian component also.
Fantastic. And I'm also hoping that when we do get to the point where we're talking about school preparedness, traffic safety in one of our future meetings, hopefully we'll be able to go more in depth on this. So I'm looking forward to that discussion when we
Well,
get there.
and with Vision Zero, again, the successes in Europe, they don't license their drivers as young as we do. In most European countries, it's 18 to get your first driver's license, and then it's a tiered process. So most times you can't drive on all of the roads anywhere in the country until you're 21 or 22. We have learner's permit at 15 and a half, and we have licensed drivers at 16. So that is another component where we're probably not at that age where we're making the best decisions and we're behind the wheel. So that's another component of Vision Zero in Europe that makes it a little more successful, is it's much more restrictive on how you can get a driver's license than in the United States. It's pretty easy to get a license in
Right.
the United States and in California.
And again, with what you were talking about before, regardless of whether getting a license or not, there are people that are driving that don't have licenses, which results in increased fatalities. Romick?
Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair Combs. Just so I can make a comment. So Vision Zero is something that I've been studying on my own. I know that Vice Mayor Schultz last year, he brought it up, and I was like, you know what, I'm really interested. I really want to figure out what this all is. And I read about 9 annual reports, Vision Zero reports from different cities, from Philadelphia, Austin, Washington, D.C., New York City, San Francisco. And in some areas, it is true that it has worked. However, in some areas, they've seen a rise in traffic fatalities. Like, for example, like if anyone was to read the report from Philadelphia, in 2019, they had 83 fatalities, but in 2020, they had 156. So, I mean, I know we speak about it. I think you were referring to it. So as Chair Coombs is human behavior, right? Something that we can't control. So I know that some ideas were to lower the speed limit. Like, I mean, I feel like anyone who is disobeying the speed limit anyway doesn't care whether if it's 20 or 35, you know? So I would invite the public, if they want to look at the Vision Zero reports, it's all online, it's all public. I did see a common trend. I saw that pedestrian safety did go up. However, fatalities directly related to motor vehicles have gone up as well. So I think that you're right. It's about the geography. It's about the culture, and the people that live there. It's the way things are designed. And also, you know, the template doesn't work in every single area. However, it could be implemented in Burbank where it could work depending on, you know, how it's enforced. And that's what it came down to, is enforcement. You know, how is it enforced? How does the city manage it? And I think that's what really correlates to its success.
Yeah, I mean, so, you know, in 2021, the city of Los Angeles had 289 traffic fatalities. That was a 20-year high in the city. And they've invested several hundred million in Vision Zero programs. To your point, Commissioner, New York, Portland, Oregon, Washington, D.C., and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and San Francisco all have instituted vigorously in Vision Zero, all have had an increase in traffic fatalities over the last 5 years.
And I know that the goal is to reduce traffic fatalities. We got to acknowledge something else, though, that we've talked about here before, is the role of the pandemic. What happened was there were less people driving, there were less people on the street, there were more people speeding, and there were more fatalities where speed goes up, increased fatalities. This is a conversation that we'd had previously when we've been talking about traffic safety in this room. So that's it. The data, unfortunately, is probably going to be skewed for a little bit as well. The ultimate goal is to reduce fatalities, to reduce injuries, but we just have to acknowledge that we're going to have some data issues for a few years because of that.
No, higher speeds result in more horrific
Yeah.
crashes. It's science.
Yeah.
So, you know, if the faster people are driving, the more damage they're going to do to another car or a human body when they hit it.
Right. Any other questions or comments? Okay, Sergeant Stone, thank you so much for your time this evening. Really appreciate this. All right, moving on to our next agenda item. Item number 2 is discussion and action, if any, of the Racial Identity Profiling Act, which is the RIPA Advisory Board report. And this is a discussion for our commission, and I just need to bring some of my notes up real quick as we do this. Is there anybody that wanted to start with an introduction to the report and observations of the report? Just give me 1 second here.
Okay.
Mike, did you want to go ahead?
I'm impressed with the report. It's a pretty in-depth report, 223 pages. It bases its recommendations on conclusions that are gathered from facts, hard facts. I put it right up there with the President's report on 21st century policing. It had that kind of impact on me. And I think it could on our department as well. I'm not sure if from the amount that's in the report, if we can actually extend some of the discussion on that over several sessions. When we received, or when we reviewed the President's report, I think our commission spent an entire year going through pillar of the different parts of the report. And this has a significant, I think, import to our community and concerns of the public in general. So we may want to consider doing that.
Agreed. Other initial reactions or observations?
Chair Combs, I would just my initial reaction, not to get too in depth, just really impressed at how comprehensive it was, and just going through detail by detail, line by line, different categories. So just want to mention that.
So I wanted to note a couple of different things. One, the Burbank Police Commission's actually mentioned in the report. So I just wanted you all to be aware of that if you didn't catch that. It was looking at how data is reviewed, how oversight takes place with police departments. They're looking at various different models. And Burbank was one of 4 cities that was specifically mentioned about that. I'm starting to believe in Kismet a little bit, and things kind of happened for a reason. And so I'm rereading a book that I read a number of years ago. It's Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow, and it spends a lot of time talking about, among other things, racial profiling as well. I know that was a concern and an issue that we've raised up in the past. Grateful that we're reviewing this. There's nothing in the data that surprises me, quite honestly, but I also know that we're working towards trying to make collective changes on that. Mike, you had mentioned that this may lead to some additional agenda items, and I agree with that. And so we'll probably we'll work on that a little bit later on. But I think that's going to be very useful because we do want to understand what the department's doing. One thing specifically is it would be really worthwhile to take a look at the RIPA data, not just for the state. For maybe take some of the larger metropolitan areas that are identified in the report, and take Burbank, and specifically take a look at Burbank's policy 322.6, which is the consent for search, which will then, it ties into pretext for stops, which they spend a lot of time with in the report, and justification for making stops and initiating searches as well. That's something that we'll probably end up wanting to spend a lot more time with down the road, just to explore it. Like what we've done with other agenda items with the Burbank Police Department, is get a better understanding for how the policy is applied, how it is trained to, and how it is reinforced over time within the department. Other comments about the report?
I'm sensitive to the concerns of people that feel they've been profiled, but I also am sensitive to what I would call community policing, and I don't know if that's allowed to be said anymore. When I first moved to Burbank, I got pulled over, and police officer literally introduced himself. I didn't recognize your car. I was glad he did it. And I know other people have told me that is offensive, but I just think that we have to be careful not to handcuff a police officer's ability to community police because he's afraid of being lumped into a group of people and told that he's racial profiling.
I think the issue that at least, from my own personal experience, haven't been stopped in Burbank that I recall. At least the background check, I don't think showed that I got stopped at any point in Burbank before joining the commission. But I remember being stopped as a kid walking down the street in another city that's actually mentioned in the report as well. And that sticks with me. I was maybe 15, 16 years old, and it really sticks with me now. And so the profiling piece is significant, and I know Burbank has been working towards trying to not make stops specifically based on profiling. The piece that we're going to want to dive into further, and we may want to ask for a report and discussion from the police department around this, is looking specifically at the numbers since they've started collecting them in Burbank. Because in the report, if I recall, I think the number of generally the number of stops identified in the report, I think the majority of stops are done by California Highway Patrol. For starters, like 52% are done by the California Highway Patrol. But the majority of stops happen to be with Hispanic, Latino, Latinx individuals. I believe it's followed by, I think it's Black or African American individuals. And so there's the statistics don't lie. The numbers don't lie generally. And one of the things that we've talked about here that we have to address is that when things happen in other parts of the state or the country, we not only we have to address it here, our community wants to address it here. It affects our officers and how they're forced to address issues. So it really behooves us to dive into the data to demonstrate how we're both similar and different. And so that's where the deep dive may need to take place. So I'm not disagreeing with yours or anybody else's experience, but the problem is just like I was describing my own individual experience. I'm one person, and this has had an impact for me on my entire life. And so we need to be talking about the context of how stops. We need to make sure they're being done appropriately. So that way we're not having an impact on somebody lifelong.
Absolutely, and I agree with you. And just to add to those, ironically, the 2 times in the 20 years that I've been pulled over was on the way to a 6:30 a.m. meeting. So I was on the road very early in the morning and probably,
Following all traffic rules, correct?
yes, but
Okay.
probably looking at me like, what's this guy doing on the road at 6:30 in the morning? And I was slightly inconvenienced, but like I said, I understood it. I consider community policing. I also understand someone who maybe has been pulled over 7 times in the last month, not quite being as enthusiastic as that. So, there's got to be a balance.
Right. Leila?
Yeah, I think just as kind of context and speaking to kind of maybe what you're both talking about, but, you know, like you said, you know, there's numbers in these reports and, you know, I would take them as true, you know, they're reported by, public agencies. So I would just say, you know, researchers have consistently found evidence of implicit and explicit racial bias and other types of bias, you know, throughout our society and our systems. It's an issue for law enforcement. It's an issue for all of us in all the systems that we participate in and in our personal lives. So the purview of this commission happens to be law enforcement, but this is not at all to say that this is just a law enforcement issue. It's everybody's issue in their life and in their job and how we conduct ourselves in the world. So, you know, I think it's just reading this is a reminder for us all to just examine ourselves, again, in the way that we participate in all the systems that we're all involved with, you know, law enforcement or not. And just to say that, you know, that California is one of at least 5 states, in addition to many cities, that make this type of data publicly available. So again, it's a conversation happening everywhere. As you mentioned, it's really important for us to have that transparency and that trust with the community that VPD is serving, that, you know, we, you know, I think next year we'll have the Burbank data, right? Because we're a smaller department, so we haven't, you know, reported yet, but to look at that and take an honest look at it, see how we are the same, see how we are different, and just, you know, be open about that and have a conversation with the community about that. And if there are any issues, you know, address them.
Thank you.
Honestly.
And
So,
Lily, I think that's probably one of the most powerful things we can do as well, is to demonstrate where we're the same and we're having issues. We need to address that and talk about where we're different. We need to be able to lift that up and raise that up
Yeah.
for the community and for our officers.
yes, and I also just want to say one more thing,
Sure.
also speaking to what you had said earlier. Just that I am a data analyst, a researcher, in my, that's my job. And I look at numbers all day, but again, numbers aren't the whole story. And so I just really appreciate you sharing your experience and to note that that is just as valid as the numbers in the report and in a spreadsheet and all of that, because it will never capture that
Yeah.
for many reasons. And it's an important part of
Yeah,
the
in
story.
this case, unfortunately, the numbers are relatively consistent, unfortunately, from an experience that happened 30 years ago, 40 years ago. So I can't believe I'm that old. So, and I think as Mark Twain said, there's lies, damn lies, and statistics. Okay.
I would be looking forward into some future discussions. The report gave a number of recommendations, and I'd like to see how that would impact our policy in our department. And we do get, like, from the OIR report, the audit that we do, we get recommendations.
Yeah.
And the chief very meticulously goes through and says, yeah, I agree with this, I agree with this. This one I'm not so sure about, and here's the reason why. And so I'd be kind of looking for that kind of response to this report as to, and they list in different sections
Right.
of the report. One other area was they spent a lot of time on pretextual stops, pretext.
Right.
And I have questions both ways on the effect and the losing some ability. It's a good cause, but maybe we're losing you can't stop somebody for a blocked window or something like that. But that may be a precursor to something else. Now, the report mentions some things that it's a little shaky how much information you'll get or if it's a crime involved. But on the other hand, I don't want to completely disregard that option to our department.
Right, I'm looking for, I'm trying to pull out some of the recommendations were, seeing the dispatcher recommendations. I don't know if anybody has access to it right away. I'm not coming up as quickly as I would have liked it to.
Around the stops?
Yeah, around the stops. All right, so I think I found it. I think I found it. So I'm looking, it's in the executive report if you want to take a look there on page, it looks like page 8. Starting on page, actually start on page 7. We don't need to read these into the record or anything like that, but I want you to take a look at how the recommendations that are made in the report about data-driven policies, which is critically important. We know this. Taking a look, I know in our previous presentation, the jaywalking presentation, my understanding, we started to make reference to it. My understanding is that part of that legislation was put in place specifically because of concern about inappropriately stopping people of color. And so I understand the context of it, but it kind of doesn't have necessarily the effect that people want to have with it. But as we get into looking at the data with Burbank, I think we'll want to take a closer look at how stops and searches take place. Again, there's a larger context. There's a statewide and a national context we need to look at, and I think it's critically important that we take a look at how Burbank is or is not falling into those patterns. Other comments? Other thoughts? Layla.
I also just wanted to point out, like, this is a little bit, not to get too in the weeds, but just, there are some limitations to this data, again, because you can't, number isn't telling the whole story. So just to point out, as we're thinking about all these things, so in terms of any of the demographics that are provided around the person stopped, right, it's all officer identified, or the perception of the officer, which is good because, again, this is meant to address any differences, based on the perception of the officer. But, it's because it is based on perception, it could be, it could be incorrect, or it could be, incomplete, or what have you. So it's, again, it's not 100% infallible in that sense. And I just, have a question kind of based on that, given that we have in Burbank a large Armenian community and Filipino community in Burbank, I'm just wondering, is there any, and just to try and get as, accurate data around the experiences of those two communities, just wondering if maybe the chief or somebody has any, if that's come up as a discussion in terms of how those folks are being, categorized, if you will, in the as officers are completing these forms, and to the point that I could see that it may not be entirely clear cut, right? Sometimes Filipino people, some may feel part of the Asian community, some may feel part of Pacific Islander community, some both. So and I'm not sure, for the Armenian community, there may be differences there. So just wondering if the department has any guidance on that, maybe, to officers in terms of how to.
Yeah, at this moment, this is actually, we might be able to ask some clarifying questions about existing policy for the department, but this is actually an item for us to wrestle with right now, so we really can't pose questions like that to them right now because we didn't give them an opportunity to prepare for them.
Okay.
Sorry about that,
No,
but
that's okay.
these are important things to bring. But
Yeah,
in
just
the
if there are questions so that,
Right.
I guess then for us to discuss.
Correct. And-
How does it apply specifically to our community, which may be different than.
And
the
that'll
state at
help
large?
because in the data, as I mentioned, that Hispanics, Latinas were kind of the highest rate statewide of being stopped, followed by blacks and African Americans. Asian Pacific Islanders actually fell, which I believe the Filipino community would fall into, actually was lower than the white or the Caucasian community that was being stopped, at least in the statewide data. So it'll be critically important for us to take a look locally at what that data looks like. Then we can go from there before we start guessing about what it might be. I do have a question, though, for the city, and hopefully you guys can help us with this. This is clarification for when we do come to agendizing an item. Consent for search, which is in a policy that I'm hoping that we can bring up and have a presentation on later on. Would that policy include pretextual stops, reasonable suspicion, and probable cause? Would that be there, or would that be somewhere else in policy?
We have a couple policies that it may apply to. So if you're going to agendize, let us know and we can review policy application, all of the above.
Okay, so it may be easier when we do agendize to, as opposed to naming the specific policy that we've got, to name the topics.
Just the process.
Okay.
Yeah, how
okay.
that looks.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
If I could just briefly, as you may know, we have a districting issue that the county is wrestling with. The community will be going through workshops. But specifically on the question of how people identify
Yeah.
is a challenge under the Voting Rights Act. Some people identify by language, which is not the same as ethnicity. When you go through the census data, it can be very difficult to figure out. In fact, some of the voting data, they just go by surname.
Right.
Because they go by ballot designations. And there's, to your point, Commissioner, there's a gross generalization when you go by surname. It can be very inaccurate, but then also what ethnic groups on a checklist people identify with versus how they may be perceived in a stop could give very inaccurate results. So I think it is a very relevant point of inquiry to acknowledge that the data could lead to conclusions that aren't necessarily accurate, to the point of statistics lie.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's just, it's subject to wild misinterpretation, depending upon how people identify versus how they're perceived in the.
A specific issue related to the data in the report is around, they're looking at percentages of the overall population in California. Well, the last U.S. Census allows people to identify up to 6 different identities, I believe it is. And if, for example, I identify as black, I'm multiracial, okay? So if I put down black, I'm going to be identified as black in the census. But if I put down that I'm multiracial, I'm not going to be counted in the black category. And now you can pick up to 6 different identities. So the numbers are actually in some cases underreported. So with large numbers, not as much of an issue. But if you're talking about smaller and smaller segments of the population, it becomes problematic statistically. Romik?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. City Attorney, thank you so much for that. Being Armenian, I classify technically as white and Caucasian. So,
Yeah.
but that white Caucasian goes to someone who's Pakistani also qualifies as Caucasian, Iraqi. So there's so many different, there's just so many different cultures and communities that are just categorized just as white. And I agree with you. He's absolutely right that it could lead to confusion. Depending on how people address it and how people approach it and how it's publicized on the media, et cetera. So there's a lot to really think about when it comes to that.
And as Mr. McDougall was alluding to, who's doing the identifying? Is it the individual that's being identified, or is it a member of the public or an officer or something like that? So, yeah.
And there could be variations agency to agency, and they're processing a lot of data.
Yeah.
And so anyway, those are just issues of error correction because they're what you get in a data dump and what you get from, say, interviewing just one side
Right.
of an altercation can be misinterpreted.
Yeah. Paul?
Maybe I'm ignorant, but I just find it difficult to believe that a police officer who is going to pull someone over purely on the nationality. If the windows are tinted or something of that nature, and you say, "Oh, you pulled me over because of my nationality," no, we pulled you over because the windows were tinted, as Mr. Chapman pointed out, or there's something else in there. I just find it difficult to believe that anybody who's done a ride-along knows how busy the police officers are, that they're going to just go out there looking for someone. And if I'm naive and I need to be educated, that's what I'm here for.
That's what we're all here for. That. Yeah.
Just
Roman?
a question. Were you referring to Burbank or just in general?
My experience in Burbank, sorry.
Any other comments on the reports? Hopefully this is getting the juices flowing to think about what we might want to agendize when we get to the end of the meeting. Mike, you look like you have a thought that needs to come
Well,
out.
I'm just wondering how we would break this down. Is it by the sections that they have provided in the report, or, because they seem to list various sections and then have recommendations at the
Right.
end of each one.
So, that's actually a good question, because one of the things that the agenda item as it's written and everything, it's that if we have any action, any action, if any. And so I'm thinking that one of our actions will most likely be in a future agenda item to have further discussion with the department about that. But it's really where we want to go with it. The important thing is the data, the report's important because it can help guide us to take a look at issues that need to be evaluated, but we don't necessarily, we're not fighting or battling with the report itself. We're really using the report and any other information we can get our hands on to make educated recommendations, whether it be for the police department or city council or whatever that may be. So it's to educate us. We don't have to use the report as a guide to tell us what we need to do.
Something along with that too is just because there's a report doesn't mean anything negative necessarily against our police department. In the report, it seems to indicate Burbank was fairly low in the number of complaints that they had, and it goes through with the type of response that there was.
Right.
And that's something that I think that we should include in our discussion so that our community is aware.
Right. So a good place for that may be when we're talking with the department. The department has the opportunity to present on it. We can use that data kind of as a point and counterpoint if need be.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd be curious if the numbers have changed since the cameras came into play. I mean, as the sergeant pointed out, the camera goes on a couple seconds before the contact is initiated, and that is an explanation to the person watching the video why the contact is made. And I just think there's a validity there, and I was wondering if some of that, because we have the cameras, if it has taken down some of our complaints because there's rock solid evidence as to why this contact took place, or if it has changed it in any way.
There's actually some data in the report that specifically talks about the number of complaints by group as well, which kind of plays into that. The problem is if we don't have the data from prior to the reports,
Right.
we don't, or prior to cameras, we don't have the ability to navigate that. So we have to start. This is our starting point.
Okay.
It really is. Okay. All right. Any other comments, thoughts? All right. So we're no action right now other than when we get to agendizing items. Okay.
Thank you for the information.
Fantastic. Thank you all for that. So the next item is the discussion and action, if any, by commissioners regarding equity in hiring. This is the dashboard calendar item for March, and this is something that we're putting on, if I believe correctly, this is something we would agendize for a future meeting?
Well, you agendize it for discussion now.
For discussion now. Okay, so let's open that up, and we can use this time to kind of prepare for, if we want to pursue this, how we want to pursue this with the department. So I want to open up for discussion. Thoughts on questions, concerns, issues you have around equity and hiring, items that you would want to pursue and explore with the department. We talked about this about a year ago and had a presentation about a year ago from the department on their hiring practices, looking at equity specifically. I want to open it up if people have questions right now. And again, these are questions for us in preparation for a future discussion. This wouldn't be anything that we can ask the department right now.
I would just be curious as to why we're losing officers to other departments that are applying, if we are. If the best and the brightest are going to other cities, I'm sure some of it's economic, but I find it interesting that we're having so much difficulty maintaining our standards, which I know is the rule number one, and to also fill in the shoes.
Okay, taking some notes here. Other comments, thoughts? I want to go ahead.
Yeah, just a question, given I also understand their hiring difficulties, and just wondering if there's any update on, how that's impacting the effort to, increase the diversity in the
Efforts to increase diversity.
And,
Okay.
how has that been impacted, or maybe not?
So I'm going to ask kind of a pointed question and everything. Is our expectation that that our force reflect the diversity and the makeup of our community, or of another location, or sometimes I work with groups that talk about the way we are and the way we want to be as well. So what's the bar, what's the standard that we're looking for if we're looking for equity in hiring?
I'm in an awkward position because I'm the white male, but I always thought that it should be even. It should be basically Social Security number. You know, you get to the starting line you give everybody the opportunity to be trained and get to the starting line even. I know not everybody has the ability to get to the starting line even. They're not given the same opportunities. But I think those opportunities should be presented, but once they get to the starting line, it should be even. One of the things that I have been very happy with the Community Academy is the number of officers that are Burbank born and bred, and they're Burbank locals, and this is what they wanted to do, and they became Burbank police officers. And the fact that that opportunity still exists, I think is very important for our youth.
Romick?
Thank you, Chair Crooms. I mean, we can't talk about equity without talking about language, right? For example, if a message has only been spread in English, I mean, how is an Armenian or anybody else who possibly might be interested or might know somebody who's interested, make that connection? So I think that would be important to put it in multi-languages, put it out there, would be really important as well.
Okay.
To your point of what would be the ideal, makeup, I guess, of the police department, I would say, I don't think it can be an exact, because you have to find the right best candidates for the open positions. So, but I think it should be at least relatively representative of the community. I think for a couple of reasons. One, because representation matters, right? Like, for a long time there were no, female police officers, and now there are a few. And so if there's a little girl and she sees a female police officer and that's what she's interested in, then she has, someone, she can see
Right.
that that's a possibility for her, right? Yeah. And also, to your point of people being local, right? So they understand the community, maybe they grew up here, they may understand it better than someone who just moves here, right? So that's in a way representative, right? Of locals
Right.
who have grown up in Burbank. And by the same token, speaking to the point of the profiling, there have been, recommendations that, to diversify police departments in an effort to reduce those disparities. I think the results are mixed on that, but I don't know if anyone else has seen kind of more conclusive results on that. I haven't seen anything that says it hurts. So I think, being more representative versus less is probably a positive.
Yeah.
So.
And I know in my family, we've had positive experiences with interactions. Again, I don't think I've been stopped, but with interactions with the Burbank Police Department. I think I recall, I think I shared with some of you a story from it. I think it was a summer or two ago. We're right around the corner here, and we're getting ready to go on a scout trip, or helping load up for a scout trip, and there are 3 motor officers in the parking lot there. Sergeant Stone was not one of them at the time, but I remember there were 2 black officers and there was 1 white officer. And my son, we really enjoyed having the conversation with them and everything. And as they took off and did their thing, my son looks at me and makes the comment. He's like, I wouldn't mind getting pulled over by them. So it's the interaction and the dialogue and the engagement is critically important. I do have to acknowledge, though, I think our the number of female officers in the department doesn't even come close to representing the number of women in the community. So that is something that I don't know if that's something that the department wrestles with, or I know recruitment can be difficult, but gender-based recruiting, I'm fairly certain has been definitely difficult and definitely not meeting the ratios within the community. So.
And by the same token, the female officers that I have met and been able to work with in the last couple of months, I know under no way, shape, or form looked upon them as if they were hired because they were females.
Right.
They were very qualified individuals. They were very competent people. And that's the fine line I think we walk when we start going down this. Was he a good black police officer, or was he a good police officer? He was a good police officer. He took the time to talk to the scouts. Was she a good female officer? Was she a good officer? She's a good officer.
Yeah.
And so I think, again, that's the fine line that I think we have to walk. It's a tightrope, but I would never want to take anything against some of the people I've experienced the rainbow of police officers,
Yeah.
in Burbank Police, and Things have changed in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
You're absolutely correct, and it's a very welcome change.
Something that I actually do want to bring up that you and I just attended at the Community Academy on that Saturday was there was a presentation. Actually, it was by Lieutenant Fromer, I think it was, talking about SWAT in Burbank and the fact that they're actively recruiting and open and how they want. It's not an accommodating, but making sure training equipment wise, standard wise, and everything. They do want female officers on SWAT, and he was talking about some of the efforts done to recruit. And I don't know if there was actually somebody in the pipeline that is actually a candidate right now that's a female officer being considered for SWAT. But he made reference to that and acknowledged that in the presentation, which I appreciate.
He did, but he also made reference to kind of hard and fast rules, but then exceptions to the rules. Like the hard and fast, you have to be on the street for 2 years. But gentleman
Right.
came in, was an Army Ranger, he had more experience than most of them.
Right.
Why wouldn't we put this training to?
Right.
And to me, that's efficient use of the training we have with us.
Right.
So so I admired the fact that we have standards, but that we also are not so blind to filling the knot, that we're not looking at the talent that we have
Right.
and using it appropriately.
And standards and prerequisites can be different.
Well said.
Mike, did you have a comment? No?
No.
Okay. Layla?
I think to your point about there may be guidelines or rules around things, right? And it's not to make exceptions for people, but it's to recognize the flexibility of, okay, this person's coming with this other experience that, checks the same box, right? Or a slightly different box, but also a very useful skill, for this team and those kinds of things. And just kind of the idea, and I guess, I don't know if this is a discussion or, questions, but just in terms of, again, just use the example of female officers. When many of these rules were created, many years ago, right? And these police departments that were all male, they were created based around, male experience or, culturally what it means to be male, all those kinds of things, right? So just an understanding of, has, the police department looked at, some of the rules or guidelines or things in place and just, to assess whether they are, like you said, create an even starting line for all folks who are interested, right? And it may be female, it may be, language or did you grow up in the States or not? Maybe, if you're an immigrant, is it just as easy, right? Or are you sort of hindered by that in order to meet some of these requirements and things like that? And then to the point too of once folks come on to the department, and this is not based on anything about the department, but just based on other arenas, like I know in higher education, right? A lot of folks who are the first in their family to go to college, many of them don't finish, even if they get there, right? So there are support groups in colleges and higher education for kids like that. And so just wondering if within the police department are there, kind of like, I know, any kind of peer support, for female officers or for, officers who, are immigrants to this country or what have you, things like that to support them and facilitate them to stay and grow, at the department.
And it's a sensitive and can be confidential topic as well, but I was thinking about how it ties directly into the wellness programs of the department as well. And are these issues being addressed and supported there in the wellness program? Again, these are, not agendized to have the department report out to us, but I do have a question that might help us a little bit. Is are the demographics of officers available to the public, or could that be available to us? Is it online?
It is.
Okay.
It is, I think.
It is not online. Thank you. If it's not online, we'll have it online by next
Fantastic.
week. Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. And actually, Mr. McDoodle, I'm glad that you're here because I was wondering whether we had to make a formal recommendation to request that data, but I appreciate the collaboration. So thank you. Thank you. Any other,
I
Paul, go ahead.
just want to follow up on what Commissioner
Go.
Hogopian, I'm sorry, I apologize, Romick. Romick's easier, but I'm trying to be respectful. Just like they talked about the gentleman who brought his other military skills to the table.
Right.
I think we need to hire people as assets, and the assets are all, can be a rainbow. What color is your parachute? And I do believe that language is one of the issues, and maybe we also need to devote, a little more time to training our officers in Spanish and Armenian. I know when I went to foreign countries, I was tested on a list of basic phrases. I'm ashamed to say that I barely passed it and forgot that immediately. But I think it makes us all more useful, but more important, it makes that initial contact with a police officer less frightening if you can address them in their tongue, and it's welcoming as opposed to frightening. So when I talk about someone coming with military skills or background, language skills are just as important.
Thank you. I actually do have one last question for all of you. In your ride-alongs that you've been on, have discussions of equity issues come up, either with the folks that are being served in the community or with the equity issues related to the rank and file within the department? Can you elaborate on it at all, or is it, not to put you on the spot, but?
No, it was more just around what is the process of collecting this RIPA data actually, because, it still hasn't been released for us, but for other places, and just seeing what does that look like, because that obviously kind of impacts what kind of data you get, and just seeing how officers work through that, how much of of their time does it take, things like that, and just questions of, things that you might not think about, right? As like a lay person, right? So the example of, it was at nighttime. And so this officer said, when I'm on patrol at night and I pull somebody over, I can't see who's in the car when I pull them over. So, so the initial stop data that you look at, maybe you want to, if you're doing an analysis, filter it by time of day. Now, it may impact what happens after the initial stop is made, right? The actions taken.
Right.
May or may not reflect on the perception, but
So
it's just kind of.
Yeah, it sounds like we're actually jumping back to the RIPA data. I'm actually thinking about equity issues amongst officers and within the department.
Oh, okay. Right, sorry. No.
Well, okay.
Okay.
Mike?
One thing that we might consider in the discussion is legal requirements, state law. If there are any minimums or recommendations or how they would put it out. I personally, from the experience, and I've been in Burbank 40 years, have seen a gradual change over the years, and I suspect that we have probably the most diverse force that we've ever had right now. And it continues in that direction.
Yeah.
But it might be one, checking what requirements are by the state, and then I don't know if we got into this with a few commissions ago about the diversity on our commission. And is there, what does our community want?
Right.
Is it, it's not really maybe it's a goal, but if they don't have the applications coming in, or they don't have the opportunities coming in, it's something that's a little bit nebulous. It's not locked down. And that's why I was kind of going towards what's required and versus what we would like as a community.
That's actually a really good point, because it's like the department. The applications that come in are the applications that come in, whether it be for the department or whether it be for the commission. But that doesn't preclude us from recruiting as well. So we can, and I know the department's involved in that activity as well. So, thank you. Roman?
I do definitely want to, thank you for your question. I definitely want to just touch on that. So far, I think I've probably gone on maybe about 7 or 8 ride-alongs already, and with different officers, and the experience has been, and when it comes to conversation about equity and race, et cetera, in the community, majority of the officers, I would say pretty much 100% of the officers, never saw race as an issue versus human behavior. And I was really proud of that. I mean, personally, as being Armenian, I know that, working with my nonprofits that we just started, we're focused on the reckless driving and the street racing issues. And, even with that, it's still the behavior that becomes what kind of reveals itself versus, because we understand that, when it comes to situations like this, it's pretty much relevant everywhere. So I would say my experience has been positive, but the conversations has been, nothing out of the ordinary, nothing negative.
Thank you.
Where do we move from here? Is there a motion or something?
Well, that's what we can do is, so one of the things that we don't have to motion it because the department's going to have the data up for us so we can explore it there. But I would like us to kind of continue to chew on it and think about that, February being Black and African American History Month, and this being Women's History Month, I think it's entirely appropriate to be exploring the diversity issues, not of the department and of the commission, for that matter. Okay.
And don't forget, we're moving up the pedestrian safety. I'm not sure where you were planning in the.
Yeah, that'll be when we agendize items. We'll be working on that. We'll be working on that. Okay, so if there's nothing else for item number 3, item number 4, and I'm gonna need your guys' input on this one. Discussion and action, if any, regarding the city council's decision on business cards for boards and commission members. So, Romik, go ahead.
I can definitely start. I know this is a conversation I've had with a couple of the commissioners. I would say my recommendation would be we would just leave it up to the commissioner to this, in regards to the business cards. I know that council is now giving us approval. And I think that I personally would want business cards to be a thing because, I'm very much in the community, very much involved. People always ask me for questions in regards to, policing, the commission, what we do. And I think it's a great way to just have something to give up. But, ultimately, I think what was more important is when I was at NACOL, I was the only person without a business card.
Yeah.
So, and people would ask me, they're like, well, why don't you have one? And I'm like, well, I don't know. So, ultimately, we want to make sure that, we have some point of reference that they can reach to. I can give my personal business card, but, it's a marketing business card, so. Yeah.
Paul?
I agree with Roman 100%. And one of the things I'll make reference to is on this commission, we have City of Burbank email addresses, so when we are discussing something with someone, and basically I think in a lot of respects, our job as commissioners is to be people's voices. When we want them to give us impact on something, by giving them my personal business card, I'm not giving them the correct email address.
Right.
And I think that this is in line with, especially for this commission, with the fact that all our communication with the public should be done on the City of Burbank email account. And I don't see a lot of use of them. I know that they've been misused in the past, but I do think there's places and there's times where there's a void when we don't have them.
So a question for me that comes up is how can we self-regulate that's my biggest concern, is the misuse. When a number of us came on the commission, there was discussion with the city about whether we should even have email addresses, because there was concern about it being misused. And that's a history that we have to acknowledge, but we don't have to say that it's our history. The business cards is kind of the next progression in that as well. How would we self-regulate that? How would we make sure that we're not misusing them other than just having a policy on a piece of paper?
I think, first of all, one of the things that the email address does is it gives the Burbank Police Department an opportunity to regulate our communication. And one of the things that the business card does is it keeps us in that monitored venue, as opposed to taking it off onto a personal level.
Right.
And if there is, I'm sure the city attorney has policies in place for misuse of government letterhead or whatever, and that could be brought up. But I do think there's time and a place where we're representing and giving my personal business. Giving a personal business card out is the only choice I have, and that's not appropriate.
Right. And actually, we recently, over the last couple of months, we signed the code of conduct that all commissions and boards are responsible for. And one of those items is actually that even when we're not doing commission business, we have to maintain a certain level of decorum because it can be reflected on the commission and on the city as well. So, good point. Other thoughts on business cards?
Just another, Chair Coombs.
Yeah.
I believe that if we can show the community that we can utilize business cards without the worry of any type of misuse or misconduct, then we can prove that, as a commission, we can make important decisions and give great advice to the council. Because ultimately, if, our jobs is to be the liaisons between the community and the police department.
Right.
And if being out there, what's really great is that from looking at the template for the business card, it's just a general police commission email. So we get a chance to see if there's any feedback that comes into the commission, we get to see what that is, which I think is great. So just want to add that as a point.
Okay. So other
Does it
thoughts?
seem to be a consensus that we all want cards here?
I haven't heard from you guys yet.
It sounds like, at times it would be handy.
Okay. Layla?
However, I think it should be very clear, and I think the council made it in their instruction very clear. no funny business with the
Right.
parents, yeah.
Right. That's a piece too that we'll follow up. I'll make it a point to follow up to find out if there's issues that come up, how we're supposed to deal with that as well. I'll work with our liaisons and with the city attorneys on that one. Okay. So I'm hearing consensus, but I think we have to do, sometimes they want us to do a formal vote.
Well, there's actually a procedure.
Oh, thank
It's
you.
in your staff report. It's attachment 1 of the policy. So it's the 3rd page. And it says policy regarding City of Burbank Board, Commission, and Committee business cards. The purpose, the procedure is Roman numeral 2. The first step of the procedure is that discussion regarding obtaining business cards must be brought forth by a member of the commission.
Done.
The chief heard you, it got agendized, and you're interested in the discussion. Second step, discussion shall return to the board, committee, or commission once it is listed on the agenda. So that's tonight.
Done.
Okay. Once on the board agenda and brought forth during the BCC Board, Commission, or Committee's regular meeting, the commission must provide a written justification for the necessity of business cards for its members. So a written justification is needed. The second step is that once the written justification is provided, then the commission votes on that. They agree that this is our justification. And then the 5th step is that goes to city council for approval. So they approved business cards and a process, but they didn't approve them for all boards and commissions.
Right.
So they'd like to hear from the commission, what is the written justification? So I heard Nicole, I heard liaison to the community. You have a subcommittee on school site, an ad hoc committee on school safety. You have some other ad hoc committees. So there is, sounds like there is a necessity for commissioners when liaising on behalf of the commission that they are representing. So that would all be part of the written justification that you would all consider at another one of your meetings, vote on, and then that would go to council.
And I'd add to that what I heard from 2 of our members was the importance of distinguishing between their business, their business and livelihood and their work on the commission, and the importance of being able to differentiate those two with a business card. Okay.
All our conversations should be up on the up and up and transparent, and this will do it. If it's on the city email address.
Okay. Well, we're talking about business cards right now.
I know, but
Yeah.
I'm saying just business cards. If Romick and I are at an event and we give out our business card
Right.
that has my Paul McKenna email address, if I give out a City of Burbank Police Commission card, it's
Okay.
going to have the Police Commission email address, which can be, my
Okay.
conversation can be monitored.
So here's what I'm going to recommend then, to comply with the policy is, if you guys are okay with it, what I can do is I can go ahead and put together a written justification. I can work with our executive committee on that to make sure that it's clear. I can present it when we're reporting out at the next meeting, and then it wouldn't actually be at that point. Do we have to agendize it for a future?
Well, I'm curious
vote?
what your executive committee is.
So the chair, the vice chair, and the secretary will periodically confer on notes, whether it be like Romick will work on the minutes from the prior meeting. He'll run it by us to make sure everything looks okay. So we're making sure that
Okay.
we don't have a quorum in that meeting, but we try to handle just the administrative business of the
Yeah.
commission.
So typically, I would suggest you form an ad hoc committee to draft a written justification.
Okay.
It can be no more than 3,
Correct.
based upon your numbers, and you can simply bring that back at a future agenda meeting and I'll vote on it.
So would we have to bring it back as an agendized item? Or can
Yes,
we
because
report-
you're voting.
Oh. So
How
okay,
does the
okay.
board vote
Gotcha.
on the written justification?
Okay.
So that's step 4, is that they vote on
Okay.
the written justification.
So we need to vote to make the ad hoc committee now?
Well, we're going to do that.
Draft it,
What we're going to do is we're going to, so here's what I'm going to recommend. One of the recommendations I'm going to have for us right now in the discussion is I'm going to recommend establishing an ad hoc committee that consists of the chair, the vice chair, and the secretary to draft a statement that would then be brought back to the next meeting. The second piece is, and we have to wait until we do agenda items for future meetings, but I'm going to recommend in this meeting that we agendize the discussion and the vote for the next meeting. So that way we don't have to come back to the table and then push it off for another month. Does that make sense? Okay. Does that, looks good? Okay, sounds good?
Yes.
Awesome. All right, we're learning. We're learning. Romick?
Would it be okay if I just make a quick comment?
Sure.
And I would say that obviously this shouldn't be a requirement for every single commissioner, because some commissioners are extremely instrumental in the commission, but they may not have the time to be out in the community discussing with people, or et cetera. But I would say that, maybe that's something that we can definitely put and have that conversation about.
Yeah, I'm actually going to recommend uniformity for equity purposes, and so that way we're not singling any commissioner out for either having or not having, and just make it a standard across the board. Okay. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and make a recommendation right now for this discussion, is that we do establish that ad hoc committee of the chair, the vice chair, and the secretary to develop that statement to bring back to the next meeting. So everybody's in agreement on that?
Yep.
No abstentions, no? Okay, great. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and do that we'll do that for the next meeting, and then we're moving on to the very last item, number 5, announcements by the police chief. Brief announcements regarding upcoming events and/or items of note related to the police department. Chief.
Good evening, and I'm going to be very, very brief. So one item that should be notable for the Police Commission is the Burbank Police Department will be participating in the Baker to Vegas Run. So that will be April 1 and 2. So that's a big deal for this department. We have a competitive team. There'll be 220 teams throughout the world that'll be participating. Very proud of our folks as far as the training that started last year. So it's all coming together the weekend of April 1st and 2nd. On April 6th is the Community Academy graduation. That's going to be at the station in the mid-level. Just FYI, you have some of your people that will be graduating if you want to come by and celebrate with that. And then the last thing is that we are still doing a lot of heavy lifting as it relates to our CAD RMS system, which is essentially the heart of the organization as far as technology. And that will be onboarded next year, but there is weekly meetings, and we're getting really, really close. City Attorney just helped us out as far as the contract. This is a significant purchase and acquisition for the department, and it will elevate our services to a marquee level as it relates to technology. And that's all I have.
Thank you. Thank you. I actually do have a question for our city attorney related to that. For the graduation, is there an issue if more, so Paul, you're the only student in there right now, correct, from the commission? So if we have more than 2 commissioners show up to that graduation, does that become a problem with Brown Act?
It is not. The proviso to every exception of a meeting is that you not meet amongst yourselves and talk about matters within your subject matter jurisdiction.
Okay.
So long as you don't, form a little discussion group, you should be perfectly fine.
So being across the room staring at each other, that's okay.
Smiling at each other is
Okay,
probably
there we
more
go.
appropriate.
All right.
Is okay.
The final's tough.
Yeah,
Fair warning on that. And I'm going to encourage, if other folks haven't participated in the academy, please consider doing that in future ones. So with that, we're now at the point where we're going to introduce agenda items for future meetings. So this is where we got some work to do based on what we did this evening. I'll let you all start with it, and then I'll try to pick up pieces if we need to. So Paul?
Going back to the academy, we had a presentation last week from the student resource officer and the officer that works with our youth in Burbank. It was about a 45-minute to 1 hour presentation.
So I don't mean to cut you off, but remember that we can't go into any extended discussion.
I was asking if we could if we could request them to
Thank
make
you.
that presentation.
Okay, so you're asking?
I was trying to tell you
Thank
where
you.
it came from.
Thank you.
Especially in light of the incidents that took place this week, and the heightened concern for our school, I would like to have that Detective Rodriguez and the SRO come make that same presentation.
So presentation from the SRO officers. Okay, so all in favor? Oh, Leila, question?
I may have missed it. Could you repeat what it was specifically about the presentation? I know it was school safety, but was there?
It was the detective that deals basically with the youth in the city of Burbank, and the one SRO officer we still have, even though they're not allowed on campuses anymore. And it was just describing some wonderful interaction they have with the youth and with the challenges they have with things that are taking place.
So to clarify, the agenda item would be the role and challenges of school resource officers?
Right, I think the presentation, I don't know how, can you help me, Sergeant? The phrase.
So just for clarification, this is just an information item for the commission to hear about the program.
Right, if we could have the same
Okay.
presentation that's already intact, they don't have to reassemble anything, it was very well done.
Layla, does that help?
Yes, just because my question was, we did have a presentation from the SROs in the past, so I just wouldn't want to
Yeah,
have them
that was
come
like, I was
again
here, but that was very brief, this is more.
This is a different,
louder.
okay, I just want to make sure we're not asking them to come and do the same thing they did.
Was it a different presentation than what we were presenting?
It was, I guess it was much more extensive and I think more personable in explaining how these officers truly make contact and truly connect with the youth.
So to clarify then, it's a presentation on the role of the SRO officer in light of recent incidents that have taken place in the schools? I just want to clarify to make sure that we're.
Recent instances are just an awkward coincidence. I just think that this is the role.
Right. The question the other commissioners are asking is, how is the presentation different? Because we've already gotten a presentation on the role of the SROs.
Okay.
So is there something specific that you're wanting to get more
I think
information
how
on?
we could support them, I guess one of my things was that I think one of our roles is to shine spotlight for our community. on
Okay,
things
so
that-
we're beyond just
Yeah,
agendizing
yeah.
an item. We can't.
Correct.
Is it okay if I interrupt? Do you mind
Please
if I, because I kind of wrote down kind of something similar, because in
Go
regards to, hopefully it makes sense. I'm like, and I just kind of wrote in a paragraph. Due to recent developments and community concerns regarding school safety, I'm requesting we agendize a report from our school resource officers in addressing potential school threats, specifically recent incidents where school threats are possible, active shooter, bullying, cyberbullying, gang activity, sexual assault, any other.
Okay.
Is that more specific?
That clarifies
I'll
it
second
a
that.
little bit.
I
Okay.
apologize. You said you were gonna do that.
All right. So did you guys get?
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
Do we have you have a list in front of you there of what we've already set up on our agendas? We have a calendar.
I do not have that in front of me right now. Yeah.
Yeah,
Second
what's
one.
what's
Don't worry about it, don't worry.
coming up?
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. All right. Okay. So we'll come to, there's still room to do this, and there's only one item on there for next month, and I'll make sure that comes up in our discussion after we finish this. So for right now, the motion is to have a presentation by the school resource officer in light of a number of significant events that Romick had just identified in his statement.
Yeah.
So, and we have a second for it
Yes.
from Paul, so all in favor? Good? No opposed? Okay, so we'll go ahead.
Are you opposing or are you?
We're,
You don't have to vote at all.
I'm abstaining.
You can
okay, so
refrain.
we have 4 in favor, 1 abstaining. Thank you. All right. Other agenda items for next month, but let me bring this up real quickly. On our calendar for April, we've identified, it's Communications Center Week. And I think it's entirely appropriate to have that presentation, especially in light of some of the items in the RIPA report as well. So I'm going to go ahead and make a. Okay. So the recommendation is that we have a presentation from the Communications Center on how the data reflected in the RIPA report it may or may not be reflected in their work. There's some specific sections on. Actually, let me back up for a minute. It's Communications Week, so we want to acknowledge the Communications Center, and we would like to get some feedback on how their training and experience to try to make sure that they are effectively meeting the needs of the community without, for lack of triggering the issues identified in the RIPA report.
So it's really two different processes. And the RIPA process has defined categories, and there's a whole process associated with that that's
Okay.
separate and apart from the communications process.
Okay.
So for the communications are dispatchers and what they do.
Right.
And they're being recognized, completely separate. Can't cross over.
Okay.
It wouldn't be prudent.
So we don't want to challenge the work and celebrate the work at the same time.
Yeah.
I agree.
Okay.
So I'm going to go, so the agenda item that we'd identified is just an acknowledgement of our communications center as it is Communications Center Week in the month of April. So the agenda item would be to recognize the work of our communications staff. So that would be the agenda item. Second, all in favor? Any opposition? Okay, so that's unanimous. Did that clarify? It's just going to be a recognition. We're going to just simply recognize the communications staff recognize the communications staff in recognition of Communications Week. I'm not saying that right.
So Communications Week is the 11th through the 15th, and it'll be before your meeting, because your
Right.
meeting's on the 19th.
Correct.
So we have a proclamation planned for the city council meeting
Okay.
on that Tuesday of the week. So this will be like after, so.
So it might be after the fact. It might not be.
I was going to say, I'm not sure what you're going to discuss to have an agenda item and say thank you, and that's it.
That's basically what we were recommending.
okay.
But we can.
That's up to you if
We
you
can just
want
say
to do
that.
that.
Actually, it'd be even better is if somebody went to that presentation and then acknowledged it in the commissioner reports. Okay, I'm going to withdraw the motion.
Can I ask you a follow- When is Police and Fire Day? Is that the 6th? May what? 13th?
Okay. All right, so we are moving on. So we're not going to be doing anything formally for Communications Week in the month of May, in the month of April, correct, in our meeting. All right, other agenda items for the month of April.
I have two, but this is for future discussion. Doesn't have to be anything immediate. Obviously, we have packed agendas. Requesting an agenda Assembly Bill 742 for reporting and discussion. Assembly Bill 742 proposes to restrict the use of police canines by law enforcement, and I believe it's important for us to review the potential impact and consider any necessary changes to, any recommendations to council in regards to policy and procedure, and getting details around, and if there's any current incidents or maybe like a 5-year history on the canine use and how canines are used, if there are any incidents with canines.
So this is a presentation from the department.
From the department.
On canine use?
Yes, sir.
Okay. In light of Assembly Bill 742.
Absolutely.
Chief?
Yeah, just for clarification, because then we're scrambling next week to make sure we understood everything. Discussion of policy, or canine policy, criteria for deployment, and maybe a couple case studies is when the dog was deployed in the last 12 months.
Romick?
Sure.
And we're doing that in light of Assembly Bill 742.
Right, and we're not
Okay.
discussing,
Assembly Bill 742 itself.
got it, okay, thank you. Does that help you?
Okay, great. All in favor? Any opposition? Okay, so it's unanimous. Other agenda items, Romick?
The only other one, same idea, in regards to Senate Bill Senate Bill 357, which states that it proposes to repeal provisions related to loitering and the intent to commit prostitution, and authorizing a person convicted of this crime to petition the court for dismissal and sealing of their case. I think it'll be interesting. I don't know if you've had a conversation or a presentation from the PD in regards to prostitution or how that's handled by the PD. If you have any incidents here and, and how obviously this bill will ultimately affect law enforcement here, if that makes sense.
So the recommendation is would this be for next month or for a future
No,
agenda item?
future.
Future agenda.
Yeah, it
So we
doesn't
can
have to
put
be
this kind of in a
anything-
parking
Oh,
spot
absolutely.
then, okay. So we're not agendizing this for next month, but we're asking to
For
add
future
to our-
conversation, yeah.
For future conversation. Presentation by the department
Presentation on my department. correct.
on prostitution in light of Senate Bill 357.
357.
Okay, so all in favor? Actually, do we have a second first?
Oh.
Second, all in favor? Yeah. Opposition? Okay, so we're parking that one we'll put that on a future agenda item, but it's not necessarily on the April agenda.
Yeah.
All right, anybody else have anything? I'll do the housekeeping piece right now. Oh, go ahead, Leila.
I think there were some questions that we had when we were having the equity and hiring discussion, so I was going to suggest an agenda item around answering some of those questions so that the department would have time to.
During that discussion, the department said that they'll be able to post that information on their website.
That was just like the staff demographic data.
Correct.
But I think there were some other questions around just what are, around, is there peer support? I don't want to get into it because we're not discussing it now, but.
Well, let me
I
just
think
say, as a because we're talking about future agenda items, when you have an agendized topic that clearly some of these were just board topics, right? Not
Right.
putting a demand on staff. It's okay. So my question in looking at your agenda is, what's their action going to be? It's perfectly appropriate to have your action be to request staff to come back with, because it's on the agenda. Future agenda items is actually more limited because the public has no idea what you're going to ask for,
Right.
and you can't advocate for something that's not agendized, right? So there's a fine line between we want information versus advocating for a certain type of information to come forward. You know what I mean? So what I'm saying is, as a point of example, you could have said, can we have, the chief said he could get you statistics on demographics of the officers.
Right.
You could also, in that item, say, we would like to get other statistics or other information to come forward at a future. So you could flesh it out under that agenda item when the public knows you're going to be talking about that matter, that theme.
Okay. So for this piece then, so Leila, what are you asking?
It's agendized for tonight, so,
Right.
I think the public's on notice you were going to talk about equity and hiring.
Okay.
So,
Oh, I see. Continue.
yeah,
Okay.
you have a topic on the agenda
So we could just
for
request-
equity and hiring.
Yeah.
Under that item, you could have said that, so the future agenda items is really intended for matters that weren't otherwise agendized for discussion. The public has no idea that you're going to ask for SRO
Okay.
information.
Yeah.
Right.
But they do know that you wanted to talk about equity and hiring, and so you could ask for a future agenda item under that agenda item.
Okay.
Because it's on the agenda.
Okay.
You can say, we'd like to have more information brought forward at a future date.
Okay.
Right.
That's
what I'm-
not
what I'm asking.
inappropriate.
That's helpful.
Because
Okay.
it's on the agenda.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
That's what I'm-
under future agenda items, you're really limited to just, you can't advocate and get in a prolonged discussion
Right.
about the thing. The risk is that you're actually arguing for a position,
Right.
right?
Right.
But
Okay.
in this case, the public already knows you're talking about equity and hiring because it's on your agenda.
Right.
So,
And
Yeah.
it doesn't necessarily have to follow in order then. So for example, we already talked about it on the agenda, but we can continue to have that discussion.
well, I would have preferred
Yeah.
that under that item, you talk about having it come forward as a future agenda item.
Okay.
That future agenda items is really, under the Brown Act, if it's not on the agenda, you're limited to brief responses to the public.
Right.
Or requesting a future agenda item, requesting a clarification, right? But because equity and hiring is an agendized item,
Right.
you can also talk about having it come back in the future when you're on that item. You know what I'm saying?
That makes sense. So let's go back. Leila, you're asking for additional clarifications. As
So
if
I
we're
guess-
jumping back. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm still not sure I'm doing this right. I would like, I believe, as you have said, and on my past experience, although it wasn't recent, that the demographic data is available online to the public. So I'm going to recommend we maybe have an ad hoc committee to look at that data for the next meeting, as well as request some additional information, answers really to questions that came up during our discussion around equity and hiring.
So what were some of the questions that you'd like the department to come back on?
So around, is there any kind of peer support or otherwise for
Okay.
either female officers or officers who are immigrants or other kind of, demographic groups that, historically weren't part of, law enforcement? And then how have the hiring difficulties impacted the diversity or representativeness, I guess, hiring goals, let's say, of the department? And I don't know if other.
Is that
folks had other
clear enough for the
questions.
department, or would it be better to kind of rephrase it?
The second part, I'm a little confused on a peer group for female officers, peer
So-
group for immigrants.
Any kind of, whether it's pure or not, any kind of particular support or policies in place for officers that are either, that could be female who are underrepresented, basically. Female officers or officers who are immigrants or what have you. Any kind of,
Can I take a shot at it?
Yeah.
Real quick, so does the wellness program or any other programs in the department address equity and inclusion issues that officers are experiencing?
So, not specifically, I think we're in two different lanes here. You're going southbound, I'm going northbound. So as far as the ask was, what does this department look like? Does it reflect our community?
Right.
And how is that process going?
Mhm.
Is it challenging? And to use your words, I know that law enforcement has been challenged. So, as far as hiring. So that's what I'm landing on.
Right.
And then we have a wellness component that we have on the shelf, because we have training, grant, and all sorts of other stuff that for the future, where we can do a deep dive. In fact, we've even considered or discussed having our psychologists present here as far as some of the programs that has been introduced to the department. So recruitment, hiring, wellness, two different.
My question was a little, touches on wellness, but also is about even, mentoring and things like that. So any kind of particular policies or initiatives in place, I guess, to retain officers who come from maybe traditionally underrepresented groups. Let's put it that way. Does that?
Yeah, go back to the process. What does your recruitment process testing look like?
Well, I guess it's even after that, right? Once they join the department, are there any particular initiatives or policies in place to
Okay.
retain them?
Is
Or
it the first 12 months? Is
yeah.
it the first 3 years? Is it the next 5 years, 10 years, 50 years?
Well, that's retention data. But what I'm hearing you ask, Leila, is whether it be the wellness program, whether it be through the psychologist, whether it be through another service, what resources are within the department to address equity and inclusion issues on an ongoing basis for officer support?
Okay,
Does that make sense?
we'll try to make it work.
This is a perfect example of why setting this agenda item for the future is better under the agendized item.
Right.
So just know if it's on the agenda, you always have the liberty to explore these questions, and it's better under the agendized item because some people may have turned off their set
Yeah.
or logged out
Right.
because they thought that was over.
And the clarification piece is that we can agendize items in the middle of the meeting. We don't have to wait till the end
That's
of the meeting
correct.
to agendize
So at
items.
some boards like planning board, they'll continue an item to a future date. And
Okay.
that's when the people are watching it. So this type of exploration is great, especially when it's agendized.
Okay.
Otherwise, that last item on your agenda is really, it's the limited items for which the public doesn't have notice you're going to talk about,
Correct.
that they're
Okay.
much more concise statements of future items.
Okay.
Yeah, so these are excellent questions and especially good under the agendized item when you're on it.
So I guess my last question is just when should we, given that then, is a request to the department, when would it make sense to revisit
So when would that come back?
for you all?
Okay, just looking at the agenda, we have SRO, which is going to be a pretty robust presentation, K-9, robust presentation, and I'm anticipating a lot of questions. If you can give me another month as far as recruitment, the processes, we'll also have some, but then we'll have the recruitment strategic plan that we
Right.
put together, and this would be a great forum to present the recruitment strategic plan
Okay.
for the year.
Would that be, so, are you still thinking about the psychologist presenting as well?
That's on wellness,
Yeah.
and that's coordinating her time,
Right.
what her presentation looks like, and then there's a price point associated with that.
Okay, and that may, just to throw it out there, that may be good for May, because May is Mental Health Month, so that would be a
Yeah,
good tie-in there. Okay,
Okay.
okay.
Okay, and I just want to make sure we didn't lose the piece of either an ad hoc committee or it can be one of us and it's not a committee, just to be able to look at that, the demographics data
So-
and and share that out at the same time we're having these.
Right. We'll
This
all be able
answers to
to
the
look at the
questions.
demographic data because it'll be posted online. So we all have access to that. So we don't necessarily need an ad hoc committee to do that unless they're doing some work around that. I'm wondering if we may want to hold that piece until after they do the presentation, if there's a deeper dive that we feel we need to take as a commission. Because I'm trying to think, what would that ad hoc committee work on between now and then while they're preparing to do a presentation as well on the information?
I guess just looking at how, looking at that and looking at the demographics of the community and doing a comparison, because as I've seen, those are the demographics by the department are rightfully so, just the demographics of the staff.
Right.
They don't include any reference. I
Mr.
think,
Chair?
to the
Yeah.
community.
To your point, once the data is available, for each of you to go, even the entire board to individually go and look at that data and come prepared with their own individual questions when the recruitment strategic plan is being presented, wouldn't require you. The committee's required if you're going to collaborate. If you don't collaborate, you can individually look at the data and bring your questions when the item is properly agendized.
Thank
Does
you.
that make
Yep,
sense?
that's fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, did we clarify the agenda item?
Yeah, Chair, that's what I was going to ask, is that for May,
Right.
wellness, with an asterisk, the availability of Dr. Galvan, and then the second part of that is the recruitment strategic plan and related processes.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Okay. And 357, we're talking, we didn't tie that down to a specific month. June, let's see, June is supposed to be the year-end review. July is currently flagged for school and traffic safety, but we were talking about moving that up to May or June. And we'll take that up next month to figure out whether we're gonna do that in May or June. Go ahead.
I figured you would. That's
Okay,
that's why
okay, all right, all right.
I knew you hadn't forgotten it.
Yeah, so the question is when would 357 and the prostitution and the loitering legislation be reviewed by us? Do we want to do that in,
357 is informative, mainly, isn't it? Yeah.
It's more about how the policy will affect the community and enforcing general first.
How does it apply to us?
okay,
Yeah, does it-
Is that-
Does it?
Sorry about that.
is that something that we could do where are we at with the agenda in April, right now?
The two items.
So,
K-9 SRO.
Would it be
Yeah,
appropriate to put
and-
that third item?
Would it be too much?
and you haven't talked about the business cards yet, so if you wanted to vote, that's an item that you haven't added yet.
yeah.
So otherwise, you're going to be waiting another couple months on that.
Right,
If
yeah,
I-
that's the piece that I'm holding
If I
on
can
to.
comment on 357, I mean, I'm okay with.
We're getting a little long on
Yeah.
that one.
Yeah, we
We've
can't-
asked for
prolong
the
that,
subject.
so-
You
Yeah.
really shouldn't talk anymore about it.
Thank you. Yeah, so the question is there room to put 357 into the next agenda, into the April agenda?
I would pass on that because you have three big ticket items.
Right.
You have SRO, K-9, business cards.
Okay, and I think the business cards would be relatively short, but I agree.
Yeah,
I agree. Okay,
but-
so let's hold on, we're just gonna hold it in the parking lot for right now, Romick, and then we'll go from there. So the last item that I'm gonna recommend to agendize for the month of April is, a discussion on the written recommendation on business cards. And that's a commission discussion and decision. Okay? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? All right, there we go. All right. Any other agenda items that folks want to propose? All right, I'm giving folks the stink eye. All right, so the next meeting date is April 19th, 2023, 6 PM here, and I adjourn this meeting. Thank you, everybody.
It's the most popular thing you said all night. Now here comes the scariest.
And
After 2 hours, can I
I
stand?
wanted to be here for less than 2.
Next time we're
No,
gonna.
you know what, I can do it, it's just, it's gonna hurt.
Okay,
Which wouldn't have had anyway.
okay,
Fine.
okay.